Sri Aurobindo is describing the logic of evolution, and he takes up now the key question of how the human being appeared. He has necessarily to address all possibilities from a logical standpoint. He has also to take into account all the objections to these possibilities. And so the text necessarily goes into fine options and addresses every objection to each of these options. And so it sounds almost like a legal text in some way. But at the same time, Sri Aurobindo does not say, this is how it happened. He has to say, it can happen this way, it can also happen that way, and it is likely to have happened like that. Because the moment he says, this is how it happened, he could be labeled, first of all, as just a theorist. But more importantly, he cannot say this is how it happened, because in fact, as we will see, every possibility of how it could happen has been utilized by nature. Even if that possibility was partially utilized, it was still utilized. So, for the human mind, we tend to look instinctively at one path. Nature never works like that. Nature works in a broad, multifaceted action, many things at the same time going together. And we have an outcome which has come partly through this, partly through that, partly through another path, and somehow coalesced into one outcome. Logically, we may say this was the most important, this was secondary. But if you think about it, she could have as well made that path more important, this secondary. So in this description of Sri Aurobindo, he has to cover all these different paths, and just because appearance of human life on earth may have primarily utilized one of these using others as secondary, doesn't mean on other planets it would be different. Doesn't mean on other planets it must be the same. It can be different in other planets. Or even on earth, and this is the tricky thing, the appearance of the human being might have happened not once but many times, using different paths, different processes. Even it is possible that it appeared once, was destroyed, and then had to reappear a second time or a third time. And so all this description has great value when you begin to look at the question from this perspective, from a more universal angle. So he takes up this question of the developing human evolutionary process which we have so far studied. And from this background, we have to look at man, his origin and first appearance, and then eventually what is his status in the whole manifestation. Straight away, he started with two possibilities. Either there was the sudden appearance of a human body and consciousness, an abrupt creation, an independent, automatic manifestation of reasoning mentality in the material world. Or there was an evolution of mentality out of animal being, slow perhaps in its preparation and in its stages of development, but with strong leaps of change at the decisive points of transition. Now, here is one sudden intervention, and here is a slow evolution with rapid changes. And as we will see later, both these things are going to meet. Of these two, the easier one to understand is the slow evolution with some decisive changes. The appearance out of the blue does not fit our current physical understanding of things. But as he will show you, that is also equally not only possible but very likely. And we will see how the two meet. So I'm anticipating, but the reason being you will value equally why Sri Aurobindo has to explore both of these. So the second theory of a slow evolution with decisive steps, he says, offers no difficulty, because in the human experience, even we are able to take animals or plants and make radical changes through mixing of types, and now today even with genetic intervention. So his point is, if anything human beings can do, Why can't the secret consciousness in nature do those equally? We use external devices. Nature will also use not only external devices but equally internal devices. You may take, for example, look at the early stages of experimentation. One of the best ways to produce hybrid seeds was expose the seeds to radiation. Now you don't know what you're doing. You're just exposing it to rays which suddenly knock out something, modify something. And then you plant all those seeds. Maybe half of them die, but those which survive are mutated. They have got some radically new properties. You pick the ones closest to what you want, pick another close to what you want, combine them to make for a stable breed. That was the way we did it in the good old days. Today, with genetic interventions, particularly what is called the CRISPR technology, we are able to precisely extract one characteristic from one species, insert it precisely into another species. Even there, what is interesting is when you do an intervention like that, there is a pushback from the species. Not all of them get it. And there is even an attempt in the species to become resilient to this kind of CRISPR intervention. So it shows you that there is an underlying consciousness which is somehow accepting, rejecting, pushing back on interventions. But equally, if it accepts, it can use that intervention to rapidly move. Now, if human beings can use radiation to make genetic mutations, well, nature has lots of radiation right now from the sun and from other cosmic rays, and in certain cycles of nature, these radiations increase or reduce. The sun itself, although it has cycles, it has 11-year cycles where radiation increases and reduces. It has larger several 100-year cycles, several 1,000-year cycles, which may be responsible also for the Earth's ice ages. We know for a fact that 100,000 years, 1 lakh years, is the cycle for the ice age, of which only 10,000 years are the warm period. All the rest of the 90,000 years are pretty much ice age. And we are at the end of the warm period, which started 10,000 years ago. Why? What makes it? Maybe the sun. We don't know. We actually don't know because we have not lived long enough with our data to measure what makes for these cycles. But there's something more interesting. Every now and then the sun puts out a burst, a blast. Not just a solar flare, but these are gigantic super flares where huge billions of tons of solar material is literally thrown out at high speed, high energy, high intensity of electric charge, radiation, protons. These are so strong that they can overwhelm the Earth's magnetic field, penetrate it, even neutralize it. And if such a blast were to hit the Earth directly, scientists assume that life on Earth will actually be destroyed, at least in the part of the Earth that faces it directly. It's the magnetic field which would weaken, but still, allowing the radiation to hit at such intensities would give a blast to all the cells of all the species. All that's needed is for nature's impulse within the cells or the species to accept or reject the influence in the direction it wants, and you'll have a sudden change, massive genetic mutations all over the Earth. And then nature can selectively drop what she doesn't want, amplify what she wants. So this is just to show you that human methods, whatever we may conceive of for genetic intervention, are in fact also nature's methods. We have the ego or the sense of superiority at having achieved something new, discovered something new, except we have only taken an existing process of nature. And our arrogance prevents us from recognizing that she actually gave it or allowed us to have this tool. And so we are able, for example, I spoke of the CRISPR intervention. The actual method of CRISPR intervention is used by nature herself. In the way, for example, certain viruses insert themselves into cells or certain genetic fragments into cells, there is actually the CRISPR mechanism involved. But all of these are to show you that nature herself has all the tools. except that we don't think of nature as having hands and tools to intervene like the human intelligence, but she does it much more efficiently. Now, this point of Sri Aurobindo is therefore extremely important. If human beings can make this intervention, nature can do it, but effect on a large scale, the same kind of intervention. And so bring about considerable and decisive developments by means of its own creative conventions. And that's left to her choice. Now we continue the text. The necessary condition for the change from the normal animal to the human character of existence would be a development of the physical organization which would capacitate a rapid progression, a reversal or turnover of the consciousness, a reaching to a new height and looking down from it at the lower stages, a heightening and widening of capacities which would enable the being to take up the old animal faculties with a larger and more plastic, a human intelligence, and at the same time, or later, to develop greater and subtler powers proper to the new type of being, powers of reason, reflection, complex observation, etc. So he's described what those stages will be. Now I read quite a bit of it, it's a long sentence. As we study this in more detail, we will remind ourselves it will be exactly in the same sequence that the transition from human to the suprahuman will take place. And he's going to explain later. But what are these steps? Necessary condition. Necessary means if you do not have it, you cannot do it. There can be supportive conditions. You can do without them. But this is necessary. So what is necessary? From normal animal to human character, the necessary condition would be, first, development of the physical organization which would capacitate a rapid progression. You must have a physical change in the, let's say, ape consciousness, or on another animal, or in another planet, the dolphin consciousness, or perhaps the dog consciousness. Whatever thread nature picks up to say, from this I will build the thinking human. So there must be a necessary physical condition there to be developed. When we look at the human brain and the ape brain, the distinction between the two is so tiny, 0.4% or something like that. The difference is so small, but that small difference is enough to make this huge range of possibilities released. And so when we think of it, we do not need a large change. A small change is enough. The character of the change is to be able to allow greater plasticity. The change does not have to be dramatic. And so it will be the same thing from the human to the suprahuman. It will not have to be a radical physical change, but something which allows greater plasticity. Next, once that physical base is made a little bit ready, second step, a reversal or turnover of the consciousness. This is the most important. He will explain later with an example. In the old case, the animal is driven by instinct first. The thinking power is like a secondary wave on top. In the change, the consciousness now is primarily in the thinking power. The animal instinct is your base. The reversal is that you are now above the animal instinct and are now able to mold it. If this reversal does not take place, you cannot break out into the proper human domain of experience. So, the moment this reversal takes place, the third step, a reaching to a new height and a looking down from it at the lower stages. So, very quickly the mind comes into its own and you start observing now the rest. This looking down is the stage necessary by which you can engage with the lower and further separate the characteristics. So you can see this process happening in every child's life, in our own life. When we come into our teenage typically, where the intellectual powers now suddenly begin to flower out. Yes, they were always there because it's part of our human nature, but they flower out. And you'll see children now arguing with each other on technical points, catching each other on some error. Oh, you said this word, that's wrong. As an adult, you say, oh, what's the big deal? But for them, it's a new power now to observe, to analyze and play. And with that, now, very quickly, they find their emotions are coming in the way. The emotions cloud the mind. The emotions compel me to do things which I know rationally I don't want. And so there is this whole struggle. The analogy given in the Veda is of the horse and the rider of the horse. Well, in this case, the human and the animal, the mind and the life force. The wild horse will run where it wants. The rider can sit and watch, enjoy the journey. And the impulsiveness of the vital is your tour guide. In the reversal, the mind says, but you have to discipline and obey me. You go where I want, not where you want. And between the two, there's a struggle for who controls whom until the reversal takes place. At which point the horse, we say, is broken. Meaning his separate will, his rebellious temperament is broken, and now he is pacified and he is domesticated and becomes obedient. A similar struggle takes place between our mind and our vital in our ascent into teenage. But at that point, you finally feel yourself a mind which has a vital, which has a body. If that transition is completed. So a new height and looking down from it on the lower stages. Then, once you have got into your own freedom, now comes the opportunity to really develop mind in itself. As long as it was struggling against the other, you could not have the full freedom of developing. So now comes the next stage, a heightening and widening of capacity, which would enable the being to take up the old animal faculties with a larger and more plastic, a human intelligence. So all the faculties now widened, heightened, and because you're still riding the horse, your horse is your vehicle, you have to take now the horse's capacity and include it, expand it, widen it, make it more capable in terms of that. So larger and more plastic, human intelligence. And then finally, at the same time or later, so in the more developed part of humanity, this further change will happen at the same time. For the rest of humanity, it happens later. What happens then? And that's when the full development of the human being comes. And at the same time or later, to develop greater and subtler powers proper to the new type of being. Now we have come into our own. The true mind is active. Often for us, this actually becomes possible in either late teenage, if you're lucky, otherwise for the rest of your life. What happens there? Develop greater and subtler powers, powers of reason, reflection, complex observation, organized invention, thought, and discovery. If you look at most of human life, at least the progressive part of human life, you could easily slide into a small groove and stay stable, stagnant. But the progressive part of us is spending most of our life in developing these things. If we could have developed these much earlier, well, the advantage would be you could do much more. But mostly our education is very flawed, very limited, extremely unsupportive of these higher faculties. But what happens? Powers of reason, actual reasoning faculties are not developed in our education as it is today. You are thrown into life and now you have to think for yourself and figure out things. But that's when you're developing this. Then reflection, especially deep reflection. And some of that comes to us because of crisis. What is wrong with this? I've tried so many times and I've failed. Where am I going wrong? Do I need to change myself? Or it takes a still more deep character. What do I really want in my life? Why am I here? Is this the way I want to go? Can I Take the risk of changing. Will I be happy? Will I be unhappy? What is the cause of my unhappiness? All of these involve a deeper reflection, whether it is subjective of your own internal change or it is objective of the character of life. One of the things we all face, well, not all, but the lucky ones, we face, life repeatedly breaks whatever you're doing. You think you're doing something wonderful, you're about to succeed, and wham, something comes and breaks it up. I said you're lucky if you have this, because it forces you into rapid growth. If you don't have it and you're successful, you very quickly slip into a groove of self-satisfaction. But if you face repeatedly these battering actions of life breaking your good work and your success, it literally is forcing you to grow somehow, outgrow your attachment to results, outgrow your own basic limitations until you discover, oh yeah, this is what the spiritual traditions always said, do things without desire, do them as part of your... All those ideas begin to be justified if you have had experiences like that. But that's again a reflection of the nature of life. I don't know if you will remember in your early years, if you have studied some of the more deep psychological texts in the English classes, because it is a European text which is given to us even in India. You are made to study Shakespeare, not Kalidasa yet, because you are cut off from your own languages. But Shakespeare often has profound observations of this kind, of the nature of life, of the nature of human beings. And at that age, when you are made to read those things, you say, this is so silly, this is so obvious, because you understand it superficially. And a decade down or 2 decades down in your life, you suddenly remember that line. And now it makes so much more sense, because your own deeper reflection has brought you close enough to that conclusion that it can pop up and say, yes, I can understand that. And this is part of that development of the proper human life or human mind, reflection. And then he says, complex observation. All early stages involved observation. But what observation? A child looks at the picture and says, yes, I see this, I see that. That's not true observation. Mind's proper power is complex observation. You notice a pattern of behavior in people, patterns of behavior in circumstances. And at that point, you're able to say, you know what, I have been in a similar situation. I know this is going to end up that way or the other way. And you cannot prove it to anybody, because the observation involves such a complexity that unless they have that perception, you cannot prove, you cannot make them see. But these are the kinds of things which we begin to develop. They become almost intuitive at some point. A grandparent can look at a teenage child and say, oh, he's going through that phase. Why? Because you've seen enough of life to recognize those trends. So in complex observation, you're literally perceiving things which you yourself are not conscious of what you're perceiving. It's happening on multiple levels. It is what artificial intelligence is very good at. And therefore, it picks out patterns which we are unable to see. But bulk of our life really is developing this. Our success in whatever field depends on this. A doctor, for example, or a specialist looks at a microscope picture of cells and is able to say, this is cancerous or it's not. An untrained eye will struggle to distinguish between these. A skilled person can similarly look at a painting and straight away say, you have a potential for this and that. And it's obvious to him, but not obvious to others. Because the trend of that subtlety is seen. And with subsequent to complex observation, organized invention, organized thought, and organized discovery. Even dogs make invention. Crows have discovery. Crows are known now, and we can see this, they can pick up tools. They can create tools also with sticks and other things. Monkeys have been shown to be able to develop tools. Not all, but some of the more developed among them. So, Invention, thought, discovery are all part of any rudimentary mental process. But organized invention, thought, and discovery, where we actually sit down and say, how can we create something which will have these particular outcomes? Can I make a computer that can become intelligent? Can I make a machine which can fly faster than sound? Can I do something which is otherwise impossible? Knowing that it's impossible, now I break it down into its component requirements, and then I break up those into component requirements. First, I need a metal which is strong enough because of the heating when I fly faster than sound. How do I make those? Look at all the metal alloys which are known to be resilient. Find a combination. Then I need an engine which can pump faster than speed of air molecules moving. Because you're moving faster than air molecules, how can you push faster than them? We need to create an engine. What mechanism shall we develop? Then what controls shall we have? Because the slightest control, your plane will go out of control before you have a chance to respond. What controls can anticipate and therefore prepare for before the change happens? You break down into so many components, and it's all systems thinking. This term didn't exist, but this is what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to. And then break them into pieces, each of those into sub-pieces. Now you have 200 different projects, each developing its own specialization, all of them leading to this final first aeroplane that can fly faster than sound. And we did this. Organized invention, thought, and even discovery. How can we discover nature's method of doing this? And you go similarly by an organized process. All of these are characteristics of the mental life proper. We have never been trained in it. All of our school training is rudimentary. It's only when you enter your job, either you have a skill, they pick you, but even with that, you're trained in the job by methods and systems that we have developed over decades or even centuries. This would not be possible if you had not first turned your consciousness and become free of the animal origin. Now, exactly the same process will happen in the emergence of the Superman from the human mind. There will be first that consciousness prepared, a base which allows it, and then the emergence and the reversal. Then that consciousness now coming into its own, looking down at the mind, taking up, widening, amplifying, making more flexible in its terms, and then at the same time or later rising to its powers proper to itself. Now, if you think of the next step, not directly in terms of the supramental, but as the first intermediary stable point, which is the intuition. This is what we are all in the process of once we begin to participate in a conscious evolution. To prepare in our mind the necessary base for the intuition to develop, except that, we will see later, Sri Aurobindo points out, your human body is already capable of that. You do not need a physical change. But you do need a psychological change, a psychological basis. And what will the psychological basis for intuition be? The ability to silence your mind and hold it in silence at will for as long as you like. Train this. This will give you access to something higher. And then with this silence of mind, you will begin to experience the things which are above, and then there will be the struggle to rise into it until you're able to stay stable in it and reverse the balance. When that happens, one of the first difficulties you will have is you look at the logical faculty, your reasoning mind, and you will see how poor it is. But in the first separating from it, it's going to drag you back. Can I risk it? Can I actually make a decision which is purely intuitive with no logical base? And there will be this struggle. The same struggle that took place with the ape. Can I go into a reasoning consciousness and lose my vital instinctive drive, which is so reliable, so safe and secure in its choices? So the same thing will happen. First there's a struggle and then a reversal. When the reversal takes place, it will look down at the poverty of reason and then begin to infuse intuition into it. Reshape the working of reason, lead intuition to guide the reason. And thereby suddenly reasoning power will become amplified, more flexible, more directly, more wide, and so on, more directly responsive to the intuition. And you will live from intuition through reason. But then still the intuition has to come into its own powers. And its own powers will then be an intuitive memory, an intuitive logic, an intuitive observation, and so on. So, the example I gave earlier of the doctor who observes this cell pattern and says, this is it, this one is cancer. The new doctor who has just joined him as assistant, how did you make out? Can you explain? Because I don't see that thing which I'm used to seeing. And the doctor says, yeah, in the early stages, the cancer is not so obvious, but here you see this trend, this is the sign. Now the fellow can barely make out, oh yeah, but can I be sure he's on that edge? Sometimes the intuitive factor is strong enough that you do not see the physical evidence, but the intuition says, no, let's do another test. In fact, in most cases of good doctors, this intuitive power has already begun to function, which is what makes them exceptional. He walks into the room, looks at the patient, and already has an idea pretty much what it might be. Or for that matter, any field of human life. If you are successful in that field above the norm, it's because of this power of intuition. But so far, in most cases, the intuition is operative, you are still in mind, you have found instinctively a way to open to it, feel it, and it kicks in, but you don't know how you did it. If this reversal has begun in you, then you actually have the ability to consciously enter into an intuitive poise. And you kind of tune in, and then click, and then you drop back. A lot of people today who are in their field exceptional have this. They may not even be conscious that they are doing it like that, but if you observe them in their decision-making process, you can see them literally tapping into the intuition. A few are actually conscious. They may not have a vocabulary. They will say gut feel, they may say intuition, but they don't know what's really happening in terms of shift of consciousness. Occasionally we see, because now this process has accelerated, we see young children having this ability. And they are as if born with it. But it's because of the work done in a previous life which is now being carried over. And so the child is looking at this, and then suddenly he tunes in and there's a click. If you ask him, what did you do? I don't know. I kind of blank out and then I get an idea. I go into this mode. They don't have the words because it's just an instinctive ability to shift. And the key though will be they're tapping into an intuition. If later as they become conscious, they may develop it and shift into it, then the breakthrough is made, after which all the rest becomes possible. So you see the pattern he is showing you. Necessary condition for this transition is exactly the same with one variation. You will not need necessarily a biological change in this case, but a psychological change will be required. Sri Aurobindo, you will recall, describes 4 steps in the training of intuition. The first was silencing the mind and being able to hold the silence at will as long as you want. Second is shifting the center of thought to above head. Instead of being somewhere here, you shift up. And just that, he says, frees you from brain fatigue, but also makes you more open to the intuitive consciousness because its center in the subtle body is higher. The third step, he says, is waiting for the initiation to begin from the intuition. So first you silence your mind, shift your poise to a higher state, and then you wait. You have to sing a song, a performance. You don't just start singing. You wait and allow the intuition to lead the first impulse and the rest of the song. You have to write a letter or an article. You wait. You have many ideas. You go through them. Then you wait. And you allow the intuition to formulate. You have to make a leap of a gymnast, a cartwheel, or begin to walk. You wait. Instead of you walking with your mind consciousness, You allow the intuition to initiate the movement. Now, when you start doing this, especially with things which require skill, you notice immediately that when intuition initiates, what happens is so much better done. If you've done the first two steps, this third step becomes almost automatic. But by doing this repeatedly, you are actually reversing the priority. Starting point is no more here, it is there. And slowly the shift begins to take place. And the fourth method is the not obviously accessible to all, but it is heightening and amplifying all of your mental faculties until they begin to reach their limit, rarefy and exceed their own mentality, and plug into the intuition. That will happen as a natural movement of the ascent. Or if your mind powers are highly developed, then the first three steps will prepare them for this kind of a direct opening. But you get the first three steps are all tied to this same process which he's describing here, but for the next step in evolution. Instead of powers of reason, reflection, complex observation, organized invention, organized thought, and organized discovery, it would be the equivalent powers of the intuitive consciousness. So now we come back to the text. If there is an emergent conscious force, there would be no difficulty in the transition because the consciousness is pushing out, and so you can see how this will happen. The instrument being provided. Once you have the instrument, the transition will happen. Except the difficulty of the obstruction and resistance of the material inconscience. You have an instrument, the push is happening, but what's the problem? Obstruction and resistance of the material inconscience. Obstruction and resistance. So Sri Aurobindo is using words very carefully. First problem is, as the consciousness is trying to emerge, it is blocked. Second problem is, although it has emerged, its attempt to take charge, its attempt to make plastic, its attempt to expand is facing at each step resistance. So first problem is obstruction, second problem is resistance. But always from the inconscience, and largely that settles back into body consciousness, or the duller part of the body consciousness. Same problem will be there in our higher work also. The first problem is obstruction. Can you even feel something above, higher than your mind? Can you feel something deeper than your surface thinking consciousness? And if you cannot, that's your first problem of obstruction. Fortunately, the spirit is stronger than matter, and every now and then gives us little bursts of experiences of these things. And rather than dismissing them, we accept them, recognize them as the help given to us, hold them. Whenever you have an unusual experience of a deeper or higher consciousness, rather than saying, oh yeah, it's a nice day, let me now fool around, you hold it, conserve it, try to extend it consciously as far as you can, extend it into your activities, make the most of it. And by doing that, you are habituating your rest of your system and imprinting into the rest of your system this higher or deeper touch. And as a result, the obstruction part is rapidly overcome. But it may still remain for the next fine level, and that's okay. We accept that's part of the process. The second problem is this resistance. In every step, it's as if there's a bit of a struggle to widen, to make plastic. Again, if you accept that that's the nature of the inconscience, you don't worry about it. In fact, particularly in the context of the integral yoga, rather than fighting the obstruction and the resistance, you try to create as quickly as possible a link, a passage with the divine force, with the divine Shakti, and invoke its help in overcoming the obstruction. Invoke its light and its presence to soften the resistance and even to dissolve the resistance. And the more you're able to do this, the more quickly the passage becomes clear and the development of consciousness becomes smooth. With the link is the movement of self-surrender. So the part in you that gives itself paves the way for the higher force to act within it and through it to overcome both obstruction and resistance. So this is the problem we have in any transition. We can, of course, enormously reduce both obstruction and resistance by other means, physical and psychological. But this is the spiritual means is the most effective. Physical and psychological means would include, for example, quality of sleep, diet, psychological practices which help to elevate the consciousness, open or plastify your consciousness, and so on. All of these would be useful, but up to a point. You could do all those practices but have no real spiritual progress except having a sattvic mind. Your mind powers may be amplified. That is good, but it's not enough. But doing that will help to create a physical basis also for the rest to take place. The point is, even here, yes, there is a physical support which can help, but it is not essential, unlike in the ape to human transition where it was essential. We continue the text. The animal has already some of the corresponding qualities on a limited scale for action only. You see, like the human being, we have all these qualities for thought. Animal has all these qualities but limited to action. So you can train an ape to do things not for self-reflection and abstract thinking, but applied reflection, turned to action, mind turned to the physical or vital needs. In a rudimentary organization, crude and simple, with a very inferior scope and plasticity, a narrower and more casual command of the faculty. So he's describing the difference between human and animal. And now we will look at it the other way. What is needed for it to become human? You have to move beyond just action to deeper reflection. You have to grow from rudimentary organization to something more complex. Wider scope, plasticity, wider and more direct command of the faculty. This is what would make a transition to the human. But especially the working of these faculties is more mechanical, less deliberate, marked with the character of an automatism of nature energy, driving an operation of primitive consciousness. That's what you see in the animal. So you notice, for example, the animal does not deliberately do it. He does it more as a mechanical, instinctive push. The dog watches the car pass. It is fixated. It can't help not being fixated on the wheels turning. And the moment the car has passed, suddenly it runs after barking. You take the dog in your car as you drive. The dog is looking at the incoming traffic. It is fixated. And as it crosses him, he starts barking. Interesting. He will never bark at an incoming car. He will only bark after the car has crossed it. It will get fascinated with the wheel and try to get to the wheel. You cannot get him to stop barking. The instinctive drive is so strong. It's so automatic. If a human being did that, after all, you would say this fellow is not human. Because innately the human stands back. What did I just do? Did it make sense? It's so silly. It's not changing the cars at all. What's the point? You stop barking. You stop shouting. Right? I have shouted 100 times. You will not change. I give up. I'd rather do something else. So, and not as in man, of a conscious energy, observing, and to a great extent directing and governing and deliberately changing or modifying its own operations. So first you observe, you direct, you control your responses, and then if you see it's not working, you deliberately change your response. And change even other operations, not only your response. My observation faculty failed. I did not notice this. Next time I ensure I notice it. In my thinking, I failed this option. Next time I ensure I include that option. You're constantly modifying all the operations of the mind with a deliberate conscious capacity. So conscious energy versus automatic energy, and all the rest follows. Other animal habits of consciousness are not fundamentally different from man's. All he had to do was to develop and enlarge them on a higher mental level. and wherever possible, to mentalize, refine, subtilize. The point he is making, from animal to human, although this was the nature of the transition, all that the human had was already present in some crude manner in the animal. You took it up and only developed it. What were the elements of development? Develop, enlarge to a higher mental level, the same thing. So let's say food. What is your instinct of food? What do you do as a human being unlike an animal? You make it mentalized. You think of what you're eating. Is this healthy? Is that more tasty? Is it beautiful? Is it enough? Can I reduce my waste? Can I make it more efficient in my preparation? Etc. The mentalization of all of the human tendencies, all of the animal tendencies which are part of our human nature, including human relationships. In the animal, they are primarily driven by attraction, repulsion, fear, instinct, convenience. We have lifted them to a mentalized poise, although those things are still there underlying. So, enlarged, brought to a higher mental level, and where possible, to mentalize, refine, subtilize. So your hands have become so much mental that literally your fingers can do what your mind wills. And there is a refinement if you have trained your fingers. You're able to do fine movements and subtilize. You're able to feel a subtle touch, make subtle movements. I remember at one time, I must have been at that time about 24, 23. There was a little gadget which is used for tuning musical instruments. And it has a rotating light. It has a tone, let's say C sharp. You're tuning your guitar or sitar to match the tone. And if you get it too high, then the thing rotates clockwise. If you get it too low, it rotates anti-clockwise. It speeds up or slows down according to how close it is. When you match it exactly, it stops. Now you have to get very high precision, down to hundredth of whatever the frequency. And the challenge for us was, can we do this with our voice? Can we match the exact frequency? And many people had tried. I was the youngest of the group. I had some training in music, throat, voice control. And none of them had been able to do it. They'd been trying for a long time. I got into it, and within about a minute, I was able to get it precisely and hold it. It took about a minute, though, to manipulate. But I still remember the feel of the consciousness going into the vocal cords. When it got the perfect alignment, it was, wow, it can hold such a fine poise and not drift from it. That it could do it perhaps was easier with a younger body and with training, but that it could hold, and the feel of that hold was such a fine, subtle edge. A little bit here, a little bit there, and you lose it. But what are you controlling? You're not feeling your vocal cords, you're controlling your consciousness. Your mind awareness as it plugs into your vocal cords is what you're holding. Like a joystick of a plane. You never move the plane's ailerons. You never move the physical wheels of the car. You're holding the steering wheel and controlling that finely. But you're not even holding the steering wheel. You're holding your hands which move the steering wheel. You're not even holding your hands. You're moving your poise of consciousness which is plugged into your hands, which makes it move the car. And you hold the poise of consciousness and everything else follows. And it's a fascinating experience when you experience it this way, even if you're driving a car or anything you do which involves fine control. This kind of subtilization is not there in the animal because there is not the deliberate power. Now, all of this which Aurobindo is showing us for the power of the mind will be equally applicable when we develop the intuition. In the intuition, you will develop also this kind of intuitivization, refinement of the intuition, and subtilization of the intuition, where something very fine in the nuance of the intuition will be possible to you. Not just in the terms of ideas, not just in the play of colors, but even in the physical action of the intuition. We have given example earlier of Kapali Shastriya, who was given the task of, he was given the work in the paints department, in the construction department of the ashram. And his job was to mix paints, to create new colors. And depending on what color was required, he had to mix them in precise proportions. But in the quantity necessary for the job, you can't make an entire bucket full of color to paint just one door. So his job was to get the exact quantity with the exact proportions for the job. And because his physical body had also been intuitivized, he would literally pick up, scoop out, and put it on the weighing device and have it exactly, precisely to the gram what was needed. In principle, he could have just put it like that and done it. Whether he measured or not subsequently, I do not know, but the power had developed of intuitivization to that degree. But what does it mean to subtilize it? You could get it to the point of precision of 1/10 of a gram perhaps. And the intuition would support this kind of subtilization. So everything he's describing here, while describing emergence of mind, applies also to the next step. But the common idea, what he's focusing on, is all these faculties already existed in cruder form in the animal, which mind has taken up and developed like this. In brief, to bring to them the enlightenment of his new understanding and intellectual capacity and a power of reasoned control denied to the animal. Almost all of our schooling processes, if properly done really, are attempts to bring into control. All the things we do which we call civilizing are bringing into control and bringing into values of mind. What will it be like when you shift from mind to intuition? To bring everything into the intuitive consciousness, to bring it to a level of a higher, over humanity. That will be the value, the standard we will also face at some point. One of the things it will involve is development of what today we call psychical powers or occult powers. Sri Aurobindo refers to this in his writings on education, that the sixth sense of mind has many more direct faculties which are not developed currently, but it's not impossible that in future these would become part of the common education. Imagine children being trained. We shuffle a pack of cards, we lay them on the table. Now tell me what this is. Pick it up and verify. Develop your intuition in this way. Why not? It should be possible for all of us. It can be an interesting exercise for you to attempt. You will notice when you try it out, just place your hand on the card and let the suggestion come. You'll find the first few attempts you will get surprisingly right. Later on, the mind becomes bored, or the intuition begins to, or the intellect begins to say, how did I do that? It begins to analyze and it breaks the automatic intuition. But if you continue, you can even develop the capacity. Or you've shuffled cards, pick out exactly 10. Let your hand go and pick it and see whether you picked 10. In the beginning, try to feel on the edge and pick it. After a while, you'll be able to do it just directly. Now, these are all parts of our training. Once the intuitive consciousness becomes for us important enough, these two will be part of the training required. Telepathic transmission. Can you tell me what I'm thinking of? It's not difficult to do. One can even make simple demonstrations of this. I have a friend who actually does this frequently as a party demonstration. He will tell the people in the room, think of one digit. He goes out of the room, they think of it, he comes back and tells them what they thought. And then he will say, behind my back, draw a number without touching my back. And he can tell you pretty much what number you drew. And I asked him, how long did it take you? Because he's in his 50s. He said about 5 years of sustained effort. But it's not difficult. It didn't require any special spiritual training. It's part of the mind faculties waiting to be released into the intuitive consciousness, just as the animal had faculties which got released into the mind. So to bring into this higher power of reasoned control denied to the animal. This change or reversal once effected, the power of the human mind to work upon itself and things, create, know, speculate, would develop in the course of his evolution. So the key part, he says, is this reversal, where the mind has come into its own free action. After that, the rest will happen. Maybe it takes time. What are the things belonging to itself? Work upon itself and things, create, know, speculate. None of these things belong to the animal domain. They are all proper to the freed intelligence. Even if, as is conceivable, they were at the beginning small in scope, nearer to the animal, still comparatively simple and crude in their action. So the idea is, in the reversal, those very faculties still crude have now been released and become free. Same with the intuition. Your subtle powers of the intuition are there within your mind's operation embedded. They will get released. Now, this reversal is the key, remember. Of this, Aurobindo says, such a reversal has been made in each radical transition of nature. What happened earlier? Life force emerging turns upon matter. When first life came out of matter, here you had living cells, living bodies, they turn upon matter and now begin to separate themselves and even dominate matter, compel matter to subjugate to life energy. And one of the ways this is happening is when we eat. Especially if you're eating not living foods but, let's say, chemical foods. You drink a chemical concoction of vitamins and minerals. It goes into your body takes up what is technically dead matter, rearranges the molecules, infusing with life and building out of it living cells. What happened? Life has come into its own strongly enough that it can take up matter and turn it. Plant does that all the time. It takes soil, water, air, all dead material, and out of that builds the plant tissue, which is living material. So reversal is the key. After that, life is stable. Till then, life may have burst out and failed. Next, he says, life mind emerges in life force and matter. So that is life force, matter is plant. Out of that, life mind emerges and imposes its content of consciousness on their operations. So in the animal, you will see the consciousness imposing itself on the working and guiding it. And so unlike plant, the animal is able to consciously respond and engage with its environment, while it develops also its own action and faculties. As a result, what's the next step? A new greater emergence and reversal. The emergence of humanity is in line with nature's precedents. So humanity is, what's the difference? Earlier was life mind, now it is mind proper. So humanity coming out in a similar way is in line with this precedent. It would be a new application of the general principle. So all this, remember, is to show you that this emergence will take place, has taken place in this manner. We have taken the opportunity to see what the next step will be. Similarly, the intuition emerging will turn upon mind and assert itself. So he says this theory is therefore easy to accept. And it fits in also with our current scientific thinking of form-based evolution, except scientific form-based evolution does not explain how the transition took place, other than saying by chance, natural selection eliminating those who couldn't make it. But that's not enough as an explanation. You see, the consciousness power as the prime driver is much more satisfying. This theory is therefore easy to accept. Its working is intelligible. We can understand. But the other hypothesis presents considerable difficulties. What was the other hypothesis? That perhaps mind popped in somehow. Mental beings came in directly, not as an evolutionary process. And that has problems. Now Sri Aurobindo will show you how that is possible, and then he will link the two. On the side of consciousness, the new manifestation, the human, could be accounted for by an upsurge of concealed consciousness from the involution in universal nature. So perhaps there is this concealed mind which somehow pushed out and suddenly appeared like that. But in that case, it must have had some material form already existent for its vehicle of emergence. The vehicle being adapted by the force of the emergence itself to the needs of a new inner creation. So if this consciousness bursts out suddenly and becomes human mind, still it needs a body. So it must have taken up some vehicle, some body to use. And so obviously some vehicle was needed which was adapted by this bursting out of the consciousness. So think of it this way. Inside nature, in the concealed mental consciousness involved in life, there's this burst of the mind energy coming forward. And what does it do? It catches some vehicle, pushes in it and compels in it a rapid change. Or else, a rapid divergence from previous physical types or patterns may have brought a new being into existence. Very quickly something changes, let's say from the ape or from the dolphin. But whichever the hypothesis accepted, this means an evolutionary process. There is only a difference in the method and machinery of the divergence or transition. So what he says is this logical process is very similar to the earlier described process, only different machinery. Where earlier it was the involved mind inside gradually emerging, here it is mind which was not involved just suddenly bursting out but doing a similar transition. But it's still evolutionary. Or, and this is the more radical possibility, or there may have been, on the contrary, not an upsurgence but a descent of mentality from a mind plane above us. So far what was discussed was still emerging from latent hidden mind consciousness, either using existing body forms or just pushing forward and changing some body form rapidly by an outer intervention. But still it shows you externally an evolutionary step. But there could be a descent from above. Descent of mentality from a mind plane above us. Perhaps the descent of a soul or mental being into terrestrial nature. The difficulty would then be the appearance of the human body, too complex and difficult an organ to have been suddenly created or manifested. Now, this is in fact part of the description which the Theosophists have of the first human emergence. They speak of the human being already on earth in a subtle body form, and at some point it took on the human body. They speak of a physical materialization, but it could equally be combined with an ape form with which the materialization fused. Why not? So this is the direction Sri Aurobindo's discussion is going. To have a human body, you still need, if we came like this from above, the human body is still too complex to have been suddenly created or manifested. For such a miraculous speed of process, though quite possible on a supra-physical plane of being, does not seem to figure among the normal possibles or potentialities of the material energy. So you can create a human body just like that on the higher planes, materialize it in the vital, mental or other worlds, no problem. But in the physical energy, material energy, you don't find such a process. Does not seem to figure. Again, suggestion is, just because it doesn't seem doesn't mean it's not possible. So it could be possible perhaps. It could only happen there by an intervention of a supraphysical force or law of nature, or by creator mind acting with full power and directly on matter. So now these are the two ways it can happen. Why is this so important? Because first of all, such a thing did happen also. But also a similar method will be used for the next step. So we have to study this part extremely well. Two things, he says. First, by an intervention of a supra-physical force or law of nature. Within nature, there might be a law or a force which is supra-physical. Nature is not just physical. Nature is also life energy. Nature also is mind energy. Nature also might have powers which we don't see. For example, we do not see nuclear processes easily. We speculate that that is the case in the sun, but it may not be so also. When there might be other sub-nuclear processes which we do not see and which we do not look outside even in nature in the larger workings, but are there hidden inside. We never see strong force, weak force, which to us now seem to be so important in the current physics. We do not see quarks and their energies, but they exist somewhere. So it's possible that there are other hidden powers inside nature, which she's not using normally. But they are there, she could have brought it out and just done it. Or by a creator mind acting with full power and directly on matter. Mind now looks down from a free plane, engages with matter, and as a creative power seizes upon matter and works it out directly on matter. Can that be possible? We have examples of people, for example, being able to modify physical processes with their thought. And this is documented in laboratories. One example, Ingo Swann, very famous psychic in the US, was hired by the US military to do these experiments, and they're all documented in military labs. So you cannot dispute it. He's shown a resistor, current passing through it. They're measuring the resistance. He's asked to concentrate to heat it up. He concentrates, and after a while it becomes hotter. At random, he's told, now focus on this, heat it up, focus on that, heat it up. Not only this, he was able to influence a subatomic particle measurement device. It's called a Hall effect device. It's a huge thing sitting underground under a concrete slab, encased in metal, encased in multiple layers at near 0 degrees in cryogenic liquid helium for the purpose of the experiment. And he's brought into the lab and said, okay, now influence the device. Where's the device? Under your feet, inside the concrete. And he says, where is it? I can't see. And with his mind, he begins to feel, what is it like? And then suddenly he has touched it with his mind. He takes a pencil and paper and starts drawing and says, is this your device? And at the same time as he's drawing, remember, he's touching it with his mind, the measurement on the device goes crazy. And so mind directly working on matter. Now this is at a subatomic level. It can equally work on a macroscopic level or molecular level, heating it up. Or there are videos of people who are able to push objects with the force of the mind. Mind using whatever other means, intermediate, still it is mind which is directing it. They are doing nothing else. So we may say the mind directs energy, which directs subtle physical matter, which directs physical matter. Still it's mind. So a creator mind with full power, not partial power, and directly on matter could also do it. So we have two mechanisms. Inside nature, a hidden power, and above nature, a creator power, but with full power. Now this is very important because we will find the same process in the higher transition. Within nature, there is already a latent, hidden, secret intuition or even supramental consciousness. And above, there is the revealed, free, universal intuition or supramental consciousness, but must engage with full power directly on matter. Both are possible and perhaps both are needed. And that's the direction the discussion is going. An action of a supra-physical force and a creator may be conceded in every new appearance in matter. Each such appearance is at bottom a miracle, operated by a secret consciousness, supported by a veiled mind energy or life energy. So he's saying now, this is not so crazy. In fact, all the transitions mentioned before involved this. Because there was always a secret energy pushing out, secret consciousness pushing out. There was a veiled life energy, a veiled mind energy already inside nature, which became overt. At that point where they came in, they were not visible. In the time of the universe, when there was only dead matter, life was not, you could have said, what is this thing called life? isn't it? At that point, life was a secret power in nature, but it was there. It came forward. Once it came, you say, life is normal. Now, what is this thing called mind? It's not possible. When it came, you say it's normal. What is this thing called intuition or supermind? It's not possible. When it kicks in, but it was always there latent inside nature. So he is saying it's exactly this process. You see, his logic is so perfect and he builds on the layers. Each appearance is at bottom a miracle. If you go deep enough, finally it's a miracle. Operated by a secret consciousness, supported by a veiled mind energy or life energy. So, veiled mind energy, life energy is above, secret consciousness is behind, within matter, and so far it was veiled life, it became unveiled. Veiled mind now became unveiled, and we have mental life. But the action is nowhere seen to be direct, overt, self-sufficient. At no point could it do it just like that, by itself. It needed something to assist, something happening. It is always superimposed on an already realized physical basis and acts by an extension of some established process of nature. Some base is required which nature has developed, and some existing process is used from which this transition is made. Now, once you accept this point, you understand why there is a sequence in evolution. So the ape couldn't have appeared first. You had to have single cells, you had to have more complex structures, creatures. And each time it was as if nature created a platform from which one more step could be made possible by this double intervention. Once that is stabilized, it creates a platform for one more step by the double intervention. Okay? So still it needs something. Out of the blue, a full human appearing, at least we don't see evidence of that, although it may be potentially possible. But the method used by nature was to bring it close enough and then the intervention for this push. It is more conceivable that there was an opening of some existing body to a supraphysical influx, so that it was transformed into a new body. In the ape, something would have been ready enough, then the influx could have held. In the human being, those of us who are consciously aspiring, consciously working to develop the higher intuitive consciousness, are the link points into which this waiting consciousness can begin to engage and the influx can settle. And that's why this effort is so important. That's why these spaces are so important. We are literally, Sri Aurobindo, the mother used this phrase, cradle of the Superman. In a cradle where the child is held. The man is not yet developed, the child is still there. Still dependent, but within us as if we are like in a cradle, opening with this influx from above. But no such event can lightly be assumed to have taken place in the past history of material nature. We can't just say, oh, it happened. We have to give some evidence or some logical basis for it, or describe what was required. In order to happen, it would seem to need either the conscious intervention of an invisible mental being to form the body he intended to inhabit, or else a previous development of a mental being in matter itself, who would be already able to receive a supraphysical power and impose it on the rigid and narrow formulas of his physical existence. So any such intervention, whether top-down or inside-out, would require already some frame of the mental being to be projected. So in the first case, an invisible mental being must form a body which he intends to inhabit. In other words, before the human step out of the ape, a formed mental body should have been already there in mental terms, into which this could move, grow into, or that would enter into this and from within shape it. But before that, the mental body should have been ready. Now you see the Theosophists' idea that there was already a mental being with mental body on earth, they materialized, is not so crazy. It's almost necessary for this. And then the question is whether it pulled this into itself or it got in and shaped from inside. At the same time, the second thing required, he says, or else a previous development of a mental being in matter itself who would be ready to receive a supraphysical power. That means in the evolving ape, already the organization of the mental being should have developed. Now, what does that mean? Already in the ape, remember we are made of three bodies. We have a gross physical body, we have the vital body, pranamaya kosha, and then manomaya kosha. The mind body in the ape is already there. It's not organized enough. If that can be shaped and organized and made ready, the biological support is not yet developed, but it could offer the base for the biological support now to accelerate. So either way, there must be a form of the mental being into which the biology grows or which imprints itself on the biology, who would be ready to receive a supraphysical power and impose it on the rigid and narrow formulas of his physical existence, a fusing, a kind of a joining. Now see what the implications are for the next step. Within us, the intuitivized consciousness must become organized as a body. There has to be in universal nature, in that higher consciousness, a body waiting to fuse or join into the human. And if you recall the mother's observations in the agenda, she makes this, describes how when her physical body could not go beyond a point, she had created for herself the subtle body of a supramental template, and she was working to fuse it into her physical. And at that point, she said she did not receive the sanction from the Supreme, so she let it be. But the fact that she took it that far is a sign of something which will now be worked out. It was perhaps premature in the current condition of humanity, but then when she left her physical body, she basically stepped into that and continued in the subtle physical world. But you see now the rationale of this. But we'll go a step further. The mother speaks of the insight she had. The supramental body will become what? Will become from where? The psychic being and the psychic substance now infused into the whole human being, densifying itself, would become the supramental body. And now you see the logic of it. Already within us, the psychic being is present as that supraphysical power of nature, in nature. That increasing and seizing upon a whole nature, filling into it the template of the mold of the supramental body, would be this action. And then from above, equally, the form developed. Otherwise, if this is not possible, we must suppose that there was a pre-existent body, already so much evolved as to be fitted for the reception of a vast mental influx, or capable of a pliable response to the descent into it of a mental being. So either it pushes out from within, or the body is sufficiently developed to receive, and the influx comes, the mental being literally enters the ape body and can function now with a full developed mind, or at least semi-developed mind, because the body is capable of holding it. Again, this point is extremely important, because Sri Aurobindo's assertion will be that the human body is already developed enough to be able to incarnate much of the intuitive and even the over-mental consciousness. And the readiness is there. So the next step, therefore, can be made with the existing structure. Obviously, there will be a purifying, refining of the whole thing, but still. But this would suppose a previous evolution of mind and body to the point at which such a receptivity would be possible. It is quite conceivable that such an evolution from below and such a descent from above cooperated in the appearance of humanity in earth nature. Now he joins the two. even to receive the descent from above, there must have been a readiness from below. For the emergence from below, there must have been some template of some kind above which assists, supports. And so both could help each other, and the two working together would have made the human transition possible. The secret psychical entity already there in the animal might have itself called down the mental being, the mind Purusha, into the realm of living matter in order to take up the vital mental energy already at work and lift it into a higher mentality. You will recall Mother's observation that when she had brought with her paintings of monkeys when she came back from Japan, as one of the few treasures she brought. And her comment when they asked her why this, she said she enjoyed looking at monkeys or pictures of monkeys because the monkeys sense the possibility of the human mind and are yearning for it. That aspiration is what she enjoyed. Whereas in the human being who have already mind, there's no yearning for anything more. And the lack of aspiration she found disappointing. But the idea is this, in the ape, suddenly there is this thing. Any of you who have had dogs at home, you will see this dog struggling to understand this power of thought that you have. The ability to speak is fascinating for animals. They look at you. The moment you speak, they're surprised and they stare. Something within them looks forward to this. And if the psychic entity within is conscious enough and consciously aspires, calls down this mental being, that would make possible this transition. Now you see the key here for us. In the transition out of human mentality into supra mentality, this conscious aspiration. Are you aspiring for a higher consciousness? Are you entering in relation with it? Are you deepening it at every moment in all activities? And if you are, you calling it down, then that action descending and your rising aspiration will create a double movement. Amplify and develop your higher faculties of mind from below and receive the descent from above, and the two will join. And so we end the last sentence in this paragraph. But this would still be a process of evolution. A higher plane only intervening to assist the appearance and enlargement of its own principle in terrestrial nature. So the higher plane engages with the lower, and still we have an evolution, but with this double movement. And so we will end this discussion with Sri Aurobindo's sentence in this little booklet, The Mother, where he puts the whole framework of the yoga. There are two powers that alone can effect in their conjunction the great and difficult thing which is the aim of our endeavor. What is the great and difficult thing? This human transformation into divinity. Two powers. A fixed and unfailing aspiration that calls from below, and a supreme grace from above that answers. That's it. These are the only two powers and their conjunction which is necessary. The two have to join. The rest of it is he is describing what is the nature of the aspiration you must have, what are the conditions under which the grace will act, and so on, for which you can reread from this point of view. But the logic of evolution and the importance of this working of two powers and their nexus and conjunction is the key in evolution, has been the key in the past, though unconsciously to the being, with only the inner consciousness participating. But for the first time in evolution, we can be conscious of this process, consciously participate in it, and make that conjunction consciously and participate in it. So this is the base, the point on which we will pause. And Sri Aurobindo then describes further what would be the implications of this, what would be the pattern and type of the evolution, and so on. And we will continue this next Sunday. We can briefly meditate on this and the importance of these two powers and their conjunction in our individual and collective lives.